I'm Liam. I'm 35 years old, and my wife won a $12 million jackpot, filed for divorce, and kicked me out of our home all in the same week. But before I tell you how the prenup her wealthy parents forced me to sign became my ultimate revenge, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It all happened on a Tuesday, a gray, forgettable Tuesday in October. The kind where the sky is the color of concrete and promises a cold rain that never quite comes. I remember the feeling of the chill in the air as I came home from the construction site, my boots caked in mud, my muscles aching in that good, tired way you get from a day of honest work. I was thinking about what we'd have for dinner, maybe suggesting we order from that Thai place Chloe loved. Simple things. That's all I ever wanted with her. But the moment I walked through the door, the air was wrong. You know that feeling? When you walk into a familiar space, but something is fundamentally off. It was dead quiet. No TV murmuring in the background. No music playing. Just a thick, sterile silence. Chloe was standing in the middle of the living room, her arms crossed. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse I'd never seen before, and heels. On a Tuesday evening, she looked different, polished, hard, like a stranger I'd passed on the street. On the polished oak coffee table, right where I usually dropped my keys, sat two documents. One was a glossy brochure for the state lottery, showing smiling, impossibly happy people holding giant checks. The other was a thick stack of legal papers, held together by a heavy-duty clip. "Liam," she said, and her voice was as cold and still as the air in the room. "I won $12 million. I blinked. The exhaustion from the day vanished, replaced by a dizzying, electric rush. "What? You're kidding me. 12. Chloe, that's incredible." I took a step toward her, a huge, stupid grin spreading across my face. My first instinct to lift her up and spin her around like I did the day we got engaged. She didn't move. She didn't even smile. She just watched me with those unreadable eyes. "And this," she said, nodding at the other document, the one that looked like a threat, "is for you. They're divorce papers." The grin on my face didn't just freeze. It shattered. It felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me into a black, bottomless pit. "Divorce? What are you talking about? We're fine. We just had breakfast together." "We're not," she said flatly, and the finality in her tone was absolute. "This apartment is in my name. My parents' lawyers have advised me to secure my assets immediately. You have 24 hours to pack your things and leave." 24 hours. $12 million. Divorce. The words echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the life we had built together. There was no discussion, no tears, no "I'm sorry," just a business transaction. My wife, the woman I loved, the woman who used to steal my sweatshirts and fall asleep on my chest, had been replaced by a CEO firing an underperforming employee. That night, I packed a single duffel bag in a complete daze. Every object I touched was a memory that cut like glass. The photo from our honeymoon in Hawaii, her laughing face smeared with sunscreen. The stupid souvenir mug I bought her from a trip to Chicago. It was all being erased. As I was about to close the bag, my hand brushed against a small, locked box at the back of my closet. It held our marriage certificate, a few old letters she'd written me, and another document I hadn't looked at in 5 years. On impulse, I fumbled for the key, opened the box, and pulled it out. It was a thick sheaf of paper, the edges slightly yellowed. The prenuptial agreement, a bitter monument to the day her father, James, had made it crystal clear that in their world, I would always be a liability. I stared at it, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. It was a symbol of my humiliation. I almost threw it in the trash, but something, a flicker of defiance, maybe, made me stop. I folded it, shoved it deep into the inner pocket of my coat, and walked out of my home for the last time. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't just carrying a reminder of my shame. I was carrying a ticking time bomb. The drive to my parents' house was the longest 45 minutes of my life. The city lights blurred through the rain that had finally started to fall, each drop on the windshield a reflection of the chaos in my mind. With every mile, I felt like I was driving backward in time, not toward the comfort of my childhood home, but toward the starting line of a race I had already lost. I was a failure, and I was running home to Mommy and Daddy. Pulling into their driveway felt like a final, crushing surrender. Their small, 3-bedroom house, the one I grew up in, looked exactly the same. The porch light was on, casting a warm, yellow glow that felt like an accusation of all the warmth I just lost. This was a house built on love and decades of my dad's overtime at the garage. It was a world away from the cold, calculated cruelty of the life I tried to build. My dad, John, opened the door before I even knocked. He's a retired mechanic, a man of few words with hands that could fix any engine but were helpless against the shattered look in my eyes. My mom, Mary, was right behind him, her face a roadmap of worry. They didn't ask questions, not at first. They just saw the duffel bag, my pale face, the rain dripping from my hair, and they knew. Mom just pulled me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and safety, and for the first time that night, the ice inside me cracked and I choked on a sob. "It's over," I mumbled into her shoulder. She won the lottery, and she kicked me out." My dad's jaw tightened into a hard line, but he just put a steadying hand on my back. "You're home now, son. That's all that matters. Let's get you inside." I spent the next few days in a gray fog, camped out on the pull-out couch in the den. The silence was the worst part. It was a canvas, and my mind painted it with memories, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. I kept thinking about the beginning, trying to pinpoint where it all went wrong. I remembered the first time I met Chloe. It was at a 4th of July barbecue hosted by a mutual friend. She was vibrant, funny, and she had this explosive laugh that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. She didn't care that I was a construction engineer and she was the daughter of a real estate tycoon. In fact, she said she loved it. I remember us sitting on the grass watching the fireworks. "You build things that are real, Liam," she'd said, her eyes reflecting the bursting colors. "Things that last." I loved that. I believed her. I believed we were building something that would last, too. Our first year together was a blur of genuine happiness. We found a small, slightly run-down apartment and spent weekends painting the walls, assembling cheap furniture, and dreaming about our future. We were a team. We were broke, but we were happy. Then I met her parents, and the first hairline cracks began to appear. The memory of our first Thanksgiving at their mansion was so sharp it felt like it happened yesterday. I'd been so nervous. I brought a bottle of wine that I'd spent way too much on. James, Chloe's father, took one look at the label, gave a tight little smile and said, "How quaint. We'll save this for cooking." Then he handed me a glass of something that tasted like smoke and leather and cost more than my car payment. The whole day was a minefield of subtle digs. Her mother, Victoria, a woman who moved with the silent grace of a predator, asked about my family. When I told her my dad was a mechanic and my mom was a school secretary, she smiled that bright, brittle smile of hers. "Oh, how wonderful," she'd said. "It must be so rewarding to do such necessary work." It was a masterclass in polite condescension. But the worst part of the day was when James cornered me in his study. He gestured to a massive, framed photo of his great-grandfather, a stern-looking man in a top hat. "Legacy Liam," he'd said, his voice low. "That's what matters. Building something that endures, that you can pass down. My Chloe is part of that legacy. You need to understand the responsibility that comes with being a part of her life." It wasn't a welcome. It was a warning. That warning solidified into the prenup. He'd summoned me to his office, a room paneled in dark wood that smelled of money and power. Chloe wasn't there. "She's too emotional for these things," he'd explained. It was just me, James, and his shark of a lawyer, Arthur Harrington. "This is just a formality, Liam," James had said, not looking at me. "A standard agreement to protect the family's assets, to ensure that what is ours stays ours. It's just good business." I remember feeling small, powerless. I was 29 and I loved his daughter. I didn't have the money or the will to fight. My best friend, David, a carpenter I'd known since kindergarten, had practically begged me not to sign it. "You're walking into a gilded cage, man," he'd warned. That family, they don't welcome people. They acquire them. I'd brushed him off, told him he was being dramatic. Now, sitting on that couch, his words echoed in my head, a prophecy fulfilled. After the wedding, we moved into the condo. It was a gift, but the down payment from James was a debt I could never repay. I poured my heart and my paycheck into that place. I paid my half of the mortgage every single month on time. I was the one who fixed the leaky faucet, who painted the bedroom, who tried to make that sterile, expensive box feel like a home. But it was never really ours. Victoria would show up unannounced with her interior designer to spruce the place up. One day I came home from work to find our comfortable, worn-in couch gone, replaced by a sterile, white monstrosity that was impossible to relax on. "What is this?" I'd asked Chloe, my voice tight. "Oh, Mom thought the old one was getting shabby. Isn't this better?" She'd said, oblivious. "Chloe, she can't just come in here and change our furniture without asking. This is our home." She'd sighed, that same dismissive sigh I would come to know so well. "You're overreacting, Liam. She's just trying to help. That's what family does." But they weren't helping. They were erasing me. Every cushion they replaced, every painting they hung, it was a message. You don't belong. Your taste is wrong. You are temporary. The memory that truly broke me as I lay there in the dark came in a flash. It was from about a month before the lottery win. We were at Chloe's for a family dinner, and I saw her outside on the patio, on the phone with her father. She was crying. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her shoulders shaking, her hand pressed against her mouth. When she came back inside, her eyes were red and puffy. I put my arm around her. "Hey, is everything okay?" She forced a smile, a brittle thing that didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, just got a little emotional. Dad was talking about his health." She lied so easily, so quickly. I knew even then that it was a lie. I knew it was about us, about me. I saw the struggle in her, the war between the woman I loved and the daughter they owned. But I didn't push. I wanted to believe that our love was strong enough to win. I thought we had time. Then a little piece of paper with 6 lucky numbers on it ran out the clock. Back in the present, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. It was from James. "Let's be adults about this, Liam. Accept things like a man." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it. The condescension. It was like a splash of ice water to the face. The fog of grief began to lift, burned away by a white-hot anger. He didn't see a grieving husband. He saw a nuisance to be managed, a piece of trash to be swept away. That's when I took the prenup out of my coat pocket. I smoothed the wrinkled pages on my parents' kitchen table. The paper felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of 5 years of quiet humiliation. I still didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them erase 5 years of my life as if it were nothing more than a failed business venture. My life with Chloe, the love, the work, the sacrifices, it had to mean something. This piece of paper was a symbol of their power over me. But what if, just what if, it could also be the key to my freedom? The next few days were the lowest of my life. I felt like a ghost haunting my own past, wandering through the rooms of my parents' house. The smell of my mom's coffee, the sound of my dad's favorite game show on TV. It was all a painful reminder of the simple, stable life I'd left behind to chase a dream that had turned into a nightmare. My parents were incredible, a constant, quiet source of support. But their kindness almost made it worse. I was a 35-year-old man, a failure sleeping on his parents' couch, and every plate of food felt like a handout. The anger I'd felt after James's text message was my only fuel. It was a slow-burning ember in the pit of my stomach. I replayed that last conversation with Chloe over and over. The coldness in her eyes, the rehearsed lines. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was an execution. I tried calling her again and again, straight to voicemail every time. Her voice, so full of life in the outgoing message, was a ghost mocking me. Finally, I sent a long, rambling text pouring out 5 years of us into a few desperate paragraphs. My confusion, my hurt, my love. I asked her why. I begged her to just talk to me, to give me an explanation. Her reply came 3 hours later. It was one clinical, soul-crushing sentence. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours." That was it. The final door slammed shut and bolted. She wasn't just my estranged wife anymore. She was the opposition, the enemy. That's when the ember of anger roared into a fire. I wasn't going to lie down and die. I wasn't going to let them write the final chapter of my story. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. My dignity was the one thing they couldn't take from me, and I was going to fight for it with everything I had left. The next morning, I put on my only decent suit, the one I'd worn to our wedding. It felt tight in the shoulders, like it belonged to a younger, more naive man. I walked into the office of a family law attorney I found online. His name was Bill, a balding man with a kind face and an office in a strip mall that smelled faintly of stale coffee. He listened patiently as I laid out the whole sordid story: the whirlwind romance, the overbearing in-laws, the prenup, the lottery win, the brutal dismissal. He nodded sympathetically. "It's a tough situation, son. Really tough." Then he asked the question that made my blood run cold. "Who is her father's legal counsel?" "Arthur Harrington," I said. Bill's friendly demeanor vanished. He physically recoiled, leaning back in his chair as if I'd mentioned the devil himself. "Harrington? Oof. He's a killer, Liam. The best and the most ruthless that money can buy. And the father, James, I know of him. He has deep pockets and a long reach in this city." He took a deep breath, avoiding my eyes. "Look, I'd love to help you, but I'm a small firm. Going up against them, it would be financial suicide for you and honestly, for me. My advice? Take whatever they offer you and run." "I'm sorry." I walked out of that office feeling smaller and more hopeless than I ever had in my life. The one person who was supposed to help me had just confirmed my worst fears. I was outgunned and utterly alone. I made 2 more calls that afternoon to other lawyers from a quick Google search. The first one cut me off as soon as I said Harrington's name. The second quoted me a retainer fee that was more than I made in 6 months. The message was clear. Justice had a price tag and I couldn't afford it. Defeated, I drove aimlessly for an hour before ending up at a construction site I'd managed a couple of years back. I sat in my truck, watching the crew. The familiar sounds of saws and hammers a strange comfort. This was my world. A world of blueprints and steel, of things that made sense. A world where hard work paid off. I thought of my best friend, David. He'd never once been impressed by Chloe's family. He'd seen them for what they were from day one. He was the only person I could talk to who wouldn't just offer pity. I called him. "Dave, it's me. Liam, where have you been, man? I've been worried sick." My voice cracked as I told him everything. The lottery, the divorce, the lawyers who wouldn't touch my case. He listened without interrupting, and when I was done, there was a hard silence on the line. Then he just said, "I'm on my way. Don't move." 20 minutes later, his beat-up Ford F-150, covered in sawdust and righteousness, pulled up next to my truck. He hopped out, a thermos of coffee in his hand. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered a solution. "My cousin," he said, handing me a steaming cup. "She went through a nasty divorce a few years back. Her ex was a piece of work, tried to hide all his assets. She hired this lawyer, a real bulldog, a woman named Sarah Jenkins. She doesn't get scared, Liam. She gets angry. She eats guys like Harrington for breakfast. You need to call her." The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Still, it was a lifeline, a tiny pinprick of light in the darkness. That afternoon, I was sitting in another lawyer's office. But this one was different. It was a modern, minimalist space in a downtown high-rise with a view of the entire city. And Sarah Jenkins was nothing like the tired man from the strip mall. She was sharp, in her early 40s, with intelligent, piercing eyes that seemed to see right through you. She wore a dark pantsuit and an air of confidence that was both intimidating and incredibly reassuring. I told my story for what felt like the 100th time, but this time, I told it with the raw anger I'd been suppressing. She listened intently, her face impassive, occasionally jotting down a note. When I got to the part about the prenup, she held up a hand. "Do you have it with you?" I pulled the crumpled document from my jacket pocket and slid it across her wide, glass desk. She put on a pair of reading glasses and began to read. The only sound in the room for the next 10 minutes was the rustle of paper. I held my breath, my heart pounding against my ribs. This was it. My last shot. She read it through once. Then she went back to the beginning and read it again, more slowly this time, her finger tracing certain lines. I saw her brow furrow slightly. My stomach sank. It was over. Then, she stopped on a page near the middle. She read a paragraph, then read it again. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her lips. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something in her eyes. It was the look of a chess master who has just seen her opponent make a fatal mistake. "They made a mistake," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "A big one. An arrogant one." Before she could explain, her assistant buzzed in on the intercom. "Mr. Arthur Harrington on line 1 for you, Sarah." Sarah's expression didn't change. She just raised an eyebrow. Perfect timing. "Put him through." She hit the speakerphone button. "Sarah." Harrington's slick, condescending voice filled the room. "I trust you've received our client's generous settlement offer. $50,000, and your client walks away quietly. It's more than fair, considering he brought nothing into the marriage and is entitled to nothing." I felt my face flush with rage, my hands balling into fists. Sarah just leaned back in her chair, that small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She let his words hang in the air for a moment. "Arthur," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "I'm looking at your client's generous offer right now." She picked up the letter from her desk, the one offering me hush money. And then, slowly and deliberately, she ripped it in half, then in half again, the sound echoing in the silent, expensive room. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "We reject your offer," Sarah said calmly, "and we will be filing for 50% of all marital assets, including the full $12 million of lottery winnings, as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement you yourself advised your client to use. We'll see you in court, Arthur." She hung up the phone, leaving a dial tone buzzing in the wake of her declaration of war. She turned to me, the smile now reaching her eyes. "Now, Liam, let's talk about how we're going to take them apart, piece by piece." For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of power. The shame was gone, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the brilliant woman sitting across from me. And most of all, they had underestimated the piece of paper that was supposed to be my cage. The war had well and truly begun. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity, a crash course in a world I never knew existed. My life became a series of meetings in Sarah's glass-walled conference room, surrounded by stacks of documents and the constant, determined hum of a legal team at work. It was a world of depositions, discovery, and financial forensics. Sarah wasn't just a lawyer. She was a general, and I was her star witness, her source of intel, her foot soldier. Her first order of business was to educate me on the weapon they had inadvertently handed us. The prenup. "The mistake is here in Section 4B, she explained during one of our first strategy sessions, her finger tapping a paragraph buried deep in the document. "It's an old template. I've seen it before from James's era of corporate raiders in the 90s. It's designed to do one thing very well: protect pre-existing assets and future inheritances. It's ironclad on that front. But look at this language." She read it aloud, slowly. "All jointly acquired assets, including but not limited to salaries, real estate, investments, and financial windfalls, shall be considered marital property and subject to equitable distribution." I stared at her, the words finally sinking in. "Financial windfalls? Bingo," she said, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "When your father-in-law and his high-priced lawyer forced this on you, they were so blinded by their own arrogance, so focused on protecting the money Chloe already had or would inherit that they used a sloppy, outdated template. They never, in a million years, imagined you two would acquire a new, massive asset out of thin air. James's arrogance is our greatest weapon, Liam." He was so sure of his own power that he didn't even bother to have Harrington draft a modern, airtight document. He just dusted off an old one from his corporate playbook. And that financial windfalls clause? That's our silver bullet. A slow smile spread across my face. The very tool of my humiliation was now the key to my victory. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. But Sarah brought me back down to earth quickly. A clause isn't enough. It's a door. We need to build a road leading right to it, paved with so much evidence they can't find a single crack. And so the digging began. The discovery phase was grueling. I spent hours upon hours, often late into the night, with Sarah's paralegal, a sharp young man named Ben. We sat at a massive table piled high with boxes of my financial life. Bank statements, credit card bills, tax returns, pay stubs. It was like excavating my own life, piece by painful piece. We traced every paycheck I'd ever deposited into our joint account, every mortgage payment I'd made, every grocery bill. We were painting a picture not just of financial contribution, but of a shared life. Partnership. Something real. The key, of course, was the lottery ticket. Where did she usually buy them? Sarah asked. A little convenience store, the Corner Mart, down the street from our condo, I said. She'd grab one whenever she went to pick up milk or bread. It was a habit. Did she use cash? A card. Usually her debit card. The one linked to our joint account. Sarah's eyes lit up. Get me the statements for that account for the last 6 months. Every single page. 2 days later, we found it. We were bleary-eyed, fueled by stale coffee, but we found it. A transaction for $4 at the Corner Mart, dated 3 days before she told me she'd won. It was sandwiched between a charge for milk and a charge for a magazine. It was a routine, domestic purchase made with our shared money. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a separate asset. It was a piece of our life together. It was marital property. Ben and I shared a high five across the table that felt more satisfying than any construction project I'd ever completed. While we were digging through our finances, Sarah was focused on the opposition. Her team started looking into James's business history, and what they found was fascinating and, frankly, a little sad. Your father-in-law wasn't born into money, Sarah told me one afternoon, sliding a file across the table. He came from a wealthy family, but he was cut out of his father's will when he was a young man. The reason? He married a woman his father disapproved of. A woman from the wrong side of the tracks. I stared at her, stunned. You're kidding me. Nope. He spent the next 30 years clawing his way back to the top, obsessed with building a fortune his family could never take away from him. He created his own dynasty so he would never be powerless again. Suddenly, James wasn't just a rich bully. He was a man driven by a deep-seated fear of losing control, of being cast out just like he was. He was replaying his own traumatic past, with me cast in the role of the unsuitable spouse his father had so despised. It didn't make me forgive him, but for the first time, I understood the source of his venom. His cruelty wasn't just about greed. It was about a wound that had never, ever healed. The other side wasn't sitting idle. Harrington was a machine. He filed motion after motion to have the case dismissed, to disqualify the prenup as unconscionable, to paint me as an opportunistic gold digger. He even filed a motion to seal Chloe's financial records, claiming privacy. Sarah fought him every step of the way. I remember one afternoon she came back from a preliminary hearing with a fierce smile on her face. The judge is not a fan of Mr. Harrington's tactics, she said. He ordered them to produce everything. We're getting the phone records. Then came the depositions. Mine was first. For 6 grueling hours, Harrington grilled me under oath, trying to twist my words, to make me look petty and vindictive. He brought up every argument Chloe and I ever had about money, every time I'd expressed frustration with her parents. So, Mr. Miller, you resented your wife's family's wealth, didn't you? He'd sneer, his pen poised. No, Mr. Harrington, I said, looking him straight in the eye as Sarah had coached me. I resented their constant interference in my marriage. There's a very big difference. The most difficult part was dealing with Chloe's sister, Jessica. Before the depositions, I'd actually had a brief, awkward phone call with her. She called me, her voice full of fake sympathy. "Liam, I'm so sorry about all this," she'd whispered. "I'm trying to talk to Dad to make him see sense. I'm on your side, you know?" Like a fool, I believed her. So when I saw her in that deposition room, I thought I had an ally. But she was a different person. She was her father's daughter. She testified under oath that I was always obsessed with their family's money, that I'd once joked that my 401k was Chloe's inheritance. It was a lie, a vicious twist of a conversation we once had. It was a cold, calculated betrayal, made all the more painful by her previous deception. She had chosen her side, and it was the side with the bigger bank account. The final, crucial piece of our puzzle came from the mountain of documents Harrington was forced to turn over. Sarah's team spent a weekend combing through Chloe's phone records and calendars. On Monday morning, she called me into her office. She had a timeline printed out on a large whiteboard like a general mapping out a battle. "Look at this, Liam," she said, her voice electric with excitement. She pointed to the date Chloe won the lottery. Then she pointed to the next morning. 8:02 a.m. Phone call with James. Duration 45 minutes. 10 a.m. Meeting at the offices of Sterling Financial, your father-in-law's money manager. 2 p.m. Conference call with Arthur Harrington. She then drew a thick red line. Below it, she wrote the date and time Chloe had finally told me about the win. It was a full 24 hours after she had met with her father's entire financial and legal team. My breath caught in my throat. It was one thing to suspect it, another to see it laid out in black and white. She didn't win the lottery and then, in a moment of emotional clarity, decide to divorce you, Sarah said, her eyes locking onto mine. She won the lottery, and the very first thing she did was meet with her father's team to plan how to cut you out. The divorce wasn't a consequence of the win, Liam. It was a pre-planned financial strategy. It was all there. The cold, hard proof. My case wasn't just about a clause in a contract anymore. It was about a calculated, malicious conspiracy to defraud me of what was rightfully mine. We had them cold, and they had no idea what was coming. The day of the hearing wasn't like a trial you see on TV. There was no jury, no dramatic objection, shouted every 5 minutes. It was quieter, more intense, and 1,000 times more terrifying. We were in a formal, wood-paneled courtroom. The air was heavy and still. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. I sat at a polished table next to Sarah, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. I'd worn my one good suit, but I felt like a kid playing dress-up. Across the room, at the opposing table, sat the enemy. Chloe was positioned between her father and Harrington. She looked thin and pale, staring at a fixed point on the wall, refusing to look at me. James, however, stared right at me. His face was a mask of contemptuous rage. He looked like a king whose divine right had just been questioned by a peasant, and he was ready for a public execution. The judge, a man in his 60s named Miller, entered. He had a reputation for being sharp, fair, and having zero patience for theatrics. He settled into his large chair, put on his glasses, and looked over the room with an expression that said, "Don't waste my time." Harrington went first. He was a performer. He stood, smoothed his $1,000 suit, and began to speak, his voice echoing with false sincerity in the silent courtroom. He painted a masterful picture of a fairy tale marriage destroyed not by greed, but by my own deep-seated resentment and inadequacy. He spoke of Chloe's kindness, her generosity, and her painful realization that she was married to a man who could never truly be her partner. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with sympathy, "this is not a case about money. This is a case about a broken heart." Mrs. Miller, at a moment of incredible, unexpected fortune, was finally forced to confront a painful truth. Her marriage was a sham. He claimed the lottery ticket was a personal gift Chloe had bought for herself with pocket money, an innocent little daydream. He claimed the decision to divorce was a tragic, emotional one, born from irreconcilable differences that had festered for years. "My client," he concluded, gesturing toward Chloe as if she were a fragile saint. Seeks to do nothing more than protect her personal assets so that she can begin the difficult process of healing and move on with her life. It was a brilliant, disgusting performance. For one terrifying second, I almost believed him. I glanced at Judge Miller. His face was a stone mask, completely unreadable. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood up, calm and composed. She didn't have Harrington's theatrical flair. She had something better, the facts. She walked to the lectern, arranged her notes, and looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Harrington is a fine storyteller. But we are not here today to discuss fiction. We are here to discuss the legal and financial facts of a 5-year partnership. And the facts, unlike Mr. Harrington's narrative, are indisputable. Her strategy was methodical, a slow, deliberate demolition. Brick by brick, she built her case. First, she presented the prenup. She didn't just submit it as evidence. She projected Section 4B onto the large screen in the courtroom. The words financial windfalls seemed to hang in the air, glowing. Harrington immediately objected, calling it irrelevant boilerplate language from a deprecated template. The judge just peered over his glasses. I can read, Mr. Harrington. The language is plain English. Let's proceed. Next, Sarah presented the fortress of financial evidence we had built. The joint bank statements, my paychecks deposited month after month like clockwork. The mortgage payments, the utility bills, the shared expenses of a shared life. She was proving beyond any doubt that this was a real, functioning financial partnership. Then she put up the receipt from the corner mart. The $4 charge that would change my life. This, Your Honor, is the transaction for the winning lottery ticket. Purchased from a joint account, funded by both partners during a routine grocery run. This was not a personal gift or a daydream. It was a household purchase, no different than a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread, made with marital funds. I could see a flicker of annoyance on Harrington's face. James was leaning forward, whispering furiously in his lawyer's ear, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. But Sarah was just getting warmed up. Now, she said, her voice dropping slightly, a signal that the main event was about to begin. I'd like to call Chloe Miller to the stand. Chloe looked like she was going to be sick. Her legs seemed unsteady as she walked to the witness box. She smoothed down her expensive dress and took the oath, her voice a reedy whisper. Sarah approached her, her demeanor deceptively gentle. She started with simple, factual questions. Chloe, when did you purchase the winning ticket? On Monday, I think. And when did you discover you had one? Tuesday morning. I checked the numbers online. A wonderful, life-changing moment. I'm sure, Sarah said conversationally. What was the very first thing you did after you realized you'd won $12 million? I called my father, Chloe stammered. I was so excited. I had to share the news with my family. Of course, Sarah said. A natural reaction. And what time was that call? I don't know. Around 8 a.m., maybe a little after. Sarah nodded, then turned to the screen. She projected Chloe's phone records, a specific call highlighted in yellow. This record shows a call to your father at 8:02 a.m. The duration was 45 minutes. A long, excited conversation. Then Sarah's tone shifted. It became sharp, precise. A surgeon's scalpel. Chloe, after that celebratory call with your father, what did you do next? I can't recall exactly. I was in shock. In shock, Sarah repeated. And yet, your calendar, which we have submitted as Exhibit C, seems to have a very clear memory. Let me help you, she said, projecting the calendar onto the screen. Does this refresh your memory? A meeting at 10 a.m., less than 2 hours after your discovery, at the offices of Mr. David Sterling, your father's personal financial advisor. Do you remember that meeting? Chloe's face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks. Yes. And what was discussed at that 2-hour meeting? Financial planning, how to manage the money. I see, Sarah said. And was your husband, Liam, your partner of 5 years, the man you built a life with, Invited to this important financial planning meeting? No, Chloe whispered, her eyes darting toward her father. Why not? It all happened so fast. There wasn't time. Indeed, it did happen fast, Sarah agreed, her voice laced with ice. She projected another entry from the calendar. Because at 2 p.m. that same day, you had a conference call with Mr. Arthur Harrington, your divorce attorney. Is that correct? Harrington shot to his feet. Objection. This is harassment. My client's emotional state is being manipulated. Overruled, the judge said flatly, his eyes fixed on Chloe like a hawk. The witness will answer the question. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. Sarah took a step closer to the witness box. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. So, let's be perfectly clear on the timeline, Chloe, for the court. You discovered you won the lottery on Tuesday morning. You immediately had a long call with your father. You then had a 2-hour meeting with his financial advisor, followed by a conference call with a divorce attorney. And yet, you didn't tell your own husband, your partner, about the $12 million win until nearly 7 p.m. that evening, at which point you also informed him his marriage was over and he was to be evicted from his home. Is that the correct and factual sequence of events? Chloe looked at Harrington, at her father, her eyes pleading for help, for a lifeline. But there was no help to be had. The evidence was absolute. The trap had closed. She was impaled on the facts. She looked down at her hands, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. A single tear rolled down her cheek and splashed onto the polished wood of the witness box. She nodded, unable to speak. Yes, she finally whispered. Sarah let the silence hang in the air for a full 10 seconds, letting the weight of that admission settle over the room. Then she turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense claims this divorce was an emotional decision made after a lottery win. The evidence proves, beyond any shadow of a doubt, the exact opposite. This was a cold, calculated financial strategy, planned and executed by Mr. James and his team, to fraudulently deprive my client of his legal share of a marital asset. The divorce wasn't the result of the win. The divorce was the mechanism to steal the win. She paused, then delivered the final, fatal blow. They didn't just break a marriage, Your Honor. They conspired to break the law. Judge Miller looked at the prenup. He looked at the bank statements. He looked at the damning timeline on the screen. Then he took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and looked directly at James. The contempt in his gaze was so palpable it felt like a physical force. I risked a glance at James. The mask of arrogant superiority was gone. Shattered. For the first time, I saw him for what he truly was. A frightened, furious old man who had been outsmarted. His own weapon of humiliation turned against him. His precious kingdom was crumbling around him, and he had no one to blame but himself. The hearing didn't end with a dramatic gavel bang like in the movies. The end was quieter, colder, and far more brutal for them. Judge Miller put his glasses back on, his expression now one of undisguised disgust. He looked at Harrington, who suddenly seemed to have shrunk inside his expensive suit. Mr. Harrington, the judge said, his voice dripping with ice, you have 1 hour to confer with your client and present this court with a reasonable settlement offer that fully reflects the terms of the prenuptial agreement, including the asset in question. If you fail to do so, I will be forced to make a ruling from the bench that I assure you will not like. Furthermore, I will be referring this entire matter to the State Bar for a full review of your and your client's conduct during these proceedings. The threat was unmistakable. He wasn't just talking about them losing the case anymore. He was talking about Harrington losing his license. It was a kill shot. The change in the air was immediate. The arrogance evaporated from Harrington's posture. James looked like he had been punched in the gut, all the air forced out of him. They shuffled out of the courtroom into a side conference room. Their shoulders slumped in defeat. No longer a royal court, but a pair of common criminals. Sarah and I sat in silence at our table. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a profound sense of exhaustion and relief. She just gave my shoulder a firm, reassuring squeeze. It's over, Liam, she said quietly. We won. 45 minutes later, a pale and shaken Arthur Harrington re-entered the courtroom. He avoided looking at the judge. He avoided looking at me. He walked stiffly over to our table and presented a document to Sarah. It was a complete and total surrender. It stipulated exactly what we were entitled to: 50% of the lottery winnings after taxes, plus a full reimbursement for my half of the equity I had paid into the condo over 5 years. No arguments. No conditions. The final meeting took place a week later, not in a courtroom, but in the sterile, soulless conference room of a mediation firm. It was the last time I would see Chloe as my wife. She was there with her father. James wouldn't even look at me. He just sat in a chair in the corner, staring out the window at the city he thought he owned, a fallen monarch in a bespoke suit. As we sat at the long table, signing the final stack of papers that would legally sever my life from theirs, Chloe finally spoke to me. Her voice was small, fragile, a ghost of the voice I once loved. "Liam, I'm sorry." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. I didn't see the cold stranger from my living room or the terrified witness on the stand. I just saw Chloe, the woman I had once loved, now hopelessly lost, a puppet whose strings were held by her domineering father. I felt a pang of sadness for her, a deep, aching pity. But the love, the foundational love, was gone. It had been systematically dismantled, lied to, and betrayed out of existence. "The saddest part, Chloe," I said, my voice steady and clear, "is that you didn't have to choose. We were a team. We could have had everything. But you didn't trust us. You trusted him." I nodded toward her father, still staring out the window. "And now you have your money, and he has his control. I truly hope it was worth it." I signed the last page, my signature firm and clear. I stood up, shook Sarah's hand, and thanked her for giving me my life back. Then I walked out of that room without looking back. I didn't feel triumphant or euphoric. I just felt free. The weight that I had been carrying for years, the constant, nagging need to prove myself, the feeling of being an outsider in my own life, it was gone. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, and for the first time in a very long time, the future was entirely and completely mine. You might think that the first thing I did with the money was buy a flashy sports car or a sterile, glass-walled penthouse downtown. You might think I'd want to rub my newfound wealth in their faces, to prove that I could play their game and win. But the truth is, the money was never the point. It was the proof. It was the validation that my contribution, my life, my partnership had mattered. The money was just a tool, and I knew exactly what I wanted to build with it. The first 6 months were quiet. It was a period of decompression, of healing. I spent time with my parents, helping my dad fix up his old project car, going for long walks with my mom. I reconnected with David, and we spent weekends fishing, not talking much, just enjoying the comfortable silence of a friendship that didn't require explanation. It was a process of rediscovering who I was without the constant shadow of James and Victoria's disapproval, without the suffocating weight of trying to be someone I wasn't. My first major act wasn't for me. It was for the 2 people who had stood by me without question. I bought my parents a new house, not a mansion, not something ostentatious that would make them uncomfortable, but a beautiful, comfortable home on a quiet, tree-lined street. It had a big yard for the grandkids they hoped to have one day, and a brand new, fully equipped 2-car garage for my dad. The day I handed them the keys, my dad, a man I'd seen cry only once in my life, had tears in his eyes. He pulled me into a rough, awkward hug and just said, "You're a good man, Liam." That meant more to me than any check ever could. With the rest of my settlement, I did something that felt like coming home. I went back to my roots. I saw all these luxury condos going up around the city, soulless glass boxes selling for millions, marketed to people who saw homes as investments. And I thought about the world I came from, the world of working families, of teachers and mechanics and nurses, people who deserved a safe, beautiful place to live without being house poor for the rest of their lives. So I founded Miller Built Homes. Our mission was simple: to use my engineering background and the best materials to build high-quality, affordable housing. We weren't just building houses, we were building communities. It was hard work, the hardest I'd ever done. Long days, sleepless nights, the stress of payrolls and permits. I poured everything I had into it. I remember one of our first projects. We were facing a huge supply chain issue, and the cost of lumber skyrocketed overnight. Our budget was blown. My accountant told me the logical thing to do was to use cheaper materials for the flooring and countertops. It would save the project and no one would know the difference, not really. I thought about James, about his world of cutting corners and prioritizing profit above all else. And I said no. We took the financial hit. We delivered what we promised. It was a defining moment for me. I wasn't just building houses. I was building a reputation based on the one thing I valued most: integrity. One day, about a year after the divorce, I was on site, covered in sawdust, when one of the new homeowners, a young elementary school teacher named Maria, came over with a thermos of coffee. "I saw the lights on late last night," she said, handing me a cup. "You work too hard, Mr. Miller. Just Liam, please," I said, smiling. "And I love what I do." "We know," she said, her eyes shining with genuine gratitude. "My husband and I, we never thought we'd be able to own a home. Not in this city. We were saving for years, and it felt like the dream was just getting further and further away. What you're doing here, it's not just building houses. You're giving people like us a chance." That conversation stayed with me for weeks. It was the payoff. It was the real win. A few months later, my friend David sent me a link to a local news article. The headline read, "Local Engineer Transforms Community with Affordable Housing Initiative." There was a picture of me, smiling and looking slightly awkward, standing with Maria's family in front of their new home. They were beaming. The article praised the company's vision, its commitment to quality and community. It called me a builder in every sense of the word. I read that article 10 times. That was the real victory. Not the money, not the revenge. It was this. It was the respect I had earned, not through marriage or inheritance, but through my own two hands and a belief in doing something good. I did hear about Chloe here and there. David told me he'd heard through the grapevine that she was miserable. She was living in a massive, empty house, still under her father's thumb. Her life a string of charity events and shopping trips. She had the money, but she had no freedom. She had become a beautiful, well-kept accessory to her father's legacy. One evening, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. It was from Jessica, Chloe's sister. It was a long and rambling, self-pitying confession. She apologized for her testimony, saying she was pressured by her father and was afraid of being cut off financially. She said that after the lawsuit, when James realized his own arrogance had cost him millions, he became even more tyrannical. The family was a wreck, she said, full of suspicion and resentment. He trusted no one. She told me she had finally left, moved across the country to get away from them. It was a sad, pathetic letter from a person I no longer knew. I read it and then I deleted it. Their drama wasn't my drama anymore. I had my own life to build, and it was a life I was damn proud of. It's been 2 years now since I walked out of that conference room for the last time. Life is different. Life is good. It's not a fairy tale, it's just real. And real is so much better than the fantasy I was trying to live in. I'm standing on a construction site right now. It's a crisp autumn afternoon, and the air smells like wet leaves and possibility. This is our third project, a small neighborhood of 12 starter homes. They're not mansions. They're modest, strong, and built with care. The framework is solid, the foundations are deep. They're the kind of homes where families will grow, where memories will be made. The kind of home my parents gave me. A young couple, the first to close on their house in this development, is here for the final walkthrough. They're probably not much younger than Chloe and I were when we started out in that first tiny apartment, full of cheap furniture and big dreams. They're holding hands, their eyes wide with that mixture of pure excitement and abject terror that every new homeowner feels. I walk them through the house, explaining the heating system, the warranty on the windows, showing them the small details we insisted on, the soft-close cabinets, the extra insulation. When we're done, I hand them a set of keys. It's a simple, small act, but it feels monumental. The woman's eyes fill with tears. "Thank you," she says, her voice thick with emotion. We never thought we'd be able to afford a place like this. Not a real house with a yard. A place of our own. Her husband shakes my hand, his grip firm and sincere. His hands are calloused like he works with them too. You're doing a great thing here, Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller. They don't know my story. They don't know about the lottery or the divorce or the ugly, soul-crushing courtroom battle. They just know me as the man who built their home. And in that moment, as the late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the freshly poured driveway, I feel the full circular nature of it all. That prenup, that document of shame, was designed to put a price tag on my worth. It was meant to say, in cold legal terms, you are worth nothing to us beyond what you can be controlled. The lawsuit, the fight, it wasn't about getting rich. It was about refuting that statement. It was about standing up in a world that tried to make me small and screaming into the void that I had value. But standing here, seeing the gratitude in this family's eyes, I understand the ultimate truth. Your worth is not something anyone can give you or take away. It's not defined by a contract or a bank account or the family you marry into. It's defined by what you build, by the lives you touch, by the integrity you maintain when everything is on the line. James wanted to build a legacy of wealth, a fortress of money to protect him from his own demons of inadequacy. But it was a hollow legacy, built on a foundation of fear, and it crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance. I wanted to build a legacy of respect, and I found it not in a judge's ruling, but here, in the sturdy frames of these houses and the hopeful faces of the families who will call them home. I lost a fortune I never really wanted, and in doing so, I gained a life that is richer than I could have ever imagined. The money was the key that unlocked the cage door, but I was the one who had to have the courage to walk through it and build something new, something real on the other side. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It's been a long and difficult journey, but sharing it has been a part of the healing. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for your own self-worth against impossible odds? I'd be honored to read your stories. Please share your experience in the comments below, and if my story touched you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.